Hello there and welcome to Scientific Serenity. Everything you hear here is carefully researched and prepared for you. Now, take a deep breath. Let the darkness become gentle. Before we begin, you may notice your body starting to relax. A gentle yawn may arrive. Your breathing may slow. As this story unfolds, your mind will drift naturally towards sleep. By the middle of this journey, rest will come quietly, and when you wake, you may feel calmer, because tonight, you fell asleep through science and learned something most people never will. If you see me as someone from your own family who researches and prepares this knowledge for you, subscribing, liking, and leaving a comment would truly mean a lot to me. And let the story begin. The year is 1917. The Great War, the war to end all wars, has devoured Europe for 3 brutal years. And it is consuming something else with a terrifying appetite: steel. Steel is the lifeblood of modern war. It is in rifles, artillery, tanks, and most critically in ships. The German U-boat campaign is strangling Allied supply lines, sending hundreds of thousands of tons of merchant shipping to the bottom of the Atlantic. Each lost ship is a tragedy of lives and a catastrophic drain of strategic material. Building new ships from steel is slow, expensive, and steals precious resources from the front lines. The Allies are bleeding steel into the ocean's depths. Any solution is needed. And from this pressure cooker of crisis emerges an idea so absurd, so counterintuitive, that it borders on madness. What if we built ships from concrete? The concept was not entirely new. There were small, experimental concrete boats in the 19th century. But a seagoing vessel? A cargo ship meant to cross the Atlantic, braving storms and submarines? To seasoned naval architects, it was a joke. A ship must be strong yet flexible, able to ride waves, not fight them. Wood bends, steel flexes. Concrete, they knew, is brittle. Cracks, shatters. The ocean is a relentless, dynamic force, and concrete is static, monolithic. Sending a concrete ship to sea seemed like sending a porcelain teacup into a hurricane, a guarantee of a tragic, short journey. But necessity is the mother of invention, and war is necessity's most demanding midwife. The theoretical foundation existed: ferro cement or reinforced concrete. The principle is elegant. Concrete is immensely strong in compression. It resists being crushed, but weak in tension, it cracks when pulled. Embed a skeleton of steel rebar or mesh within it, and you create a composite material. The steel handles the tensile forces, the concrete handles the compression and protects the steel from corrosion. In buildings and bridges, it was revolutionary. For a hull constantly flexing and torqued by waves, it was an improving gamble. The driving force was a brutal equation: strategic salvage. Steel was needed for shells, for tanks, for guns. Concrete was cheap. Its ingredients, cement, sand, aggregate, gravel, water, were abundant. Its construction didn't require highly skilled welders or vast rolling mills. It could be done by laborers with wooden forms. A concrete ship wouldn't save just cargo. It would save the steel itself for the fight. So the orders were given. In shipyards from the United States to the United Kingdom, strange new silhouettes began to take shape. Instead of the ringing clamor of rivet guns, there was the wet slosh of concrete being poured, the scrape of trowels. Instead of skeletal steel frames, there were vast, complex lattices of steel rebar, looking like the rib cages of mythical beasts. The molds themselves were works of temporary art, enormous wooden frameworks that would give the liquid stone its form, only to be stripped away to reveal what? A vessel or a tomb. The first major success was the SS Faith, launched by the United States in 1917. She was a coastal cargo ship, not an ocean giant, but her successful voyages proved the concept could work. Then came the larger ones, the ocean-class concrete ships. They were ungainly looking, their hulls thicker and blunter than their steel sisters to accommodate the material's needs. They were slower, heavier, and consumed more fuel. But they floated. They carried cargo. And they were, to everyone's surprise, remarkably durable. To understand the miracle of these ships, we must dive into the material itself. Ferro cement is a partnership, a marriage of earth and fire. The steel reinforcement, the ferro, provides the tensile strength, the sinew. The concrete, the cement, provides the mass, the bone, and most critically the protection. The concrete used was not the crude mix of a garden path. It was a carefully engineered composite. The Portland cement formed a chemical paste that, when mixed with water, underwent a process called hydration, a slow exothermic crystallization that bound the sand and aggregate into a synthetic rock. The aggregate was selected for hardness and density. The mix was designed for low permeability, to resist water intrusion that could rust the internal steel or freeze and crack in colder climates. But the true engineering marvel was in the reinforcement. Unlike the large, spaced rebar of a building, ferro cement for ships used layers upon layers of closely spaced, fine steel wire mesh, often with smaller rebar for longitudinal strength. This created a distributed, flexible steel skeleton. When the hull flexed, the stress was spread across thousands of tiny wires, none taking a critical load. The concrete, in turn, kept these wires isolated from seawater and oxygen, the two agents of corrosion that doom steel ships. In a way, a concrete ship was more protected from its environment than a steel one. Its hull was its own permanent, monolithic anti-corrosion coating. This leads us to the first hint of their eventual ghostly transformation, the carbonation process. Concrete is inherently alkaline. This high pH environment actually passivates the steel reinforcement, forming a protective oxide layer. However, over decades, a slow chemical reaction occurs. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, or dissolved in seawater, diffuses into the concrete's pores. It reacts with calcium hydroxide in the cement paste to form calcium carbonate, the same material as limestone. This process, called carbonation, slowly lowers the pH of the concrete. While it can eventually threaten the steel if it reaches it, the process is achingly slow in dense, high-quality concrete. More immediately, It changes the concrete's very color and texture. The fresh, gray cement paste darkens. It takes on a deeper, charcoal, sometimes almost black hue. It becomes harder, more stone-like. The aggregate within begins to show more clearly as the paste recedes. The ship begins its long, slow metamorphosis from a man-made construct into a geological feature. The ships of the Ghost Fleet were built with a wartime pragmatism that gave them a stark, functional beauty. Their lines were simple, their superstructures minimal. They had a solid, grounded presence in the water, a lack of frivolity that suited their purpose. Sailors who served on them reported strange acoustics. Sounds didn't ring or echo as in a steel hull. They were dampened, absorbed. The ships felt quieter, more solid, less resonant with the sea's noise. They were also notoriously difficult to repair. A hole in a steel ship could be patched. A crack in a concrete hull required careful masonry work. Yet they worked. They delivered coal, grain, and supplies. They were not glamorous, but they were functional. They were a triumph of material science over tradition, of logic over intuition. They proved that a vessel's soul is not in its material, but in its form and purpose. But the war ended in November 1918. The frantic drive to produce concrete ships ceased almost overnight. Dozens of hulls were in various stages of completion. The crisis that birthed them had passed. Suddenly, the world had a surplus of these strange stone vessels. They were an answer to a question nobody was asking anymore. What does one do with a fleet of concrete ships in peacetime? Some found uses as humble cargo carriers, grain storage hulls, or even floating warehouses. But their economic disadvantages, their weight, their fuel consumption, made them uncompetitive with returning steel shipping. Many were simply mothballed, towed to quiet backwaters, estuaries, and remote bays. They were stripped of useful parts, and their hatches were sealed. They were left to wait. And it is in this waiting, this abandonment to the elements, that the second, more profound chapter of their story began. The war created them. Peace would transform them into the legends we encounter today. The end of the war left the concrete fleet in a kind of industrial limbo. They were too useful to scuttle outright, yet not useful enough to maintain. So they were put to sleep, towed to sheltered locations, the backwaters of the Chesapeake Bay, the quiet coves of the British Isles, the remote inlets of the Pacific Northwest. They were anchored or beached in rows, creating surreal, silent armadas of stone. Their names, once proudly stenciled on their sides, faded. Their decks, once bustling with crews, grew still. In this abandonment, an unexpected truth revealed itself: their durability. While steel ships, left unattended, would begin to rust through in a matter of years, succumbing to the relentless electrochemical dance of corrosion, the concrete hulls simply sat. The sea could not rapidly oxidize them. Marine borers, worms that devour wooden hulls, found nothing to consume. The concrete carbonated, hardened, and darkened, but it did not disintegrate. They became inert, geological presences in the aquatic landscape. This resilience in the face of neglect is the first seed of their ghost mythology. A steel shipwreck collapses, folds in on itself, and is reclaimed by the sea in a relatively swift, dynamic process. A concrete hull resists. It maintains its form. It becomes a stubborn artifact, a cliff face where none should be. When tides recede, they don't reveal a twisted wreck. They reveal the intact, stark silhouette of a ship, now the color of wet slate or obsidian, standing defiantly against the waterline. This is not the romance of a tragic, sinking ship. It is the eerier, more profound spectacle of a ship that refuses to sink even in death. The most famous of these early ghost fleets is perhaps the one in Mallows Bay on the Potomac River, Maryland. Here, dozens of World War I-era concrete ships were towed and deliberately sunk to create a breakwater for a proposed ship scrapping facility that never materialized. Over the decades, they have become one of the largest and most ecologically significant ship graveyards in the Western Hemisphere. But graveyard is a misnomer. It is a nursery. The ships did not die, they transitioned. Their porous, complex surfaces became ideal substrates for marine life. Oysters, mussels, and barnacles colonized the hulls. Small fish found shelter in the crevices. As sediment accumulated in and around them, marsh grasses took root on decks that once held cargo. The ships ceased to be vessels and began their slow metamorphosis into artificial reefs and, eventually, islands. They became part of the coastline's morphology, their human origins slowly being woven into the fabric of the estuary itself. The ghost fleet was giving new life even as it was being reclaimed. This duality, their enduring, haunting human form and their vibrant, new ecological function, is the core of their mystery and their beauty. They are monuments to human crisis and ingenuity, preserved not in a museum, but in the wild, active archive of nature. They are time capsules, but not sealed ones. They are open to the elements, changing with imperceptible slowness, recording a century of weather, chemistry, and biological succession in their ever-darkening skin. As we conclude this chapter on their impossible birth and uneasy peace, we stand at the water's edge looking at these silhouettes. They are no longer just ships. They are questions made of stone. What does it mean for something to be built for a single urgent purpose, only to outlive that purpose by a century? What does it mean for a war machine to become a haven for life? They challenge our notions of decay, of legacy, and of time itself. Their story is just beginning. The next chapters will take us into the heat of war, into the deep chemistry of their transformation, and finally onto the decks of these spectral leviathans as they exist today. But for now, let the fact of their existence settle upon you. Titans of stone, born from desperation, sleeping in the shallows, waiting for the tide to tell their next story. We're moving on to the second part. We have witnessed their improbable birth from the dust of necessity. Now we cast off the lines of history and join them on the open ocean. The year is 1918. The war grinds on. These stone leviathans are no longer curiosities in a shipyard. They are active, commissioned vessels of the United States Shipping Board's Emergency Fleet Corporation. Their names are now official: SS Cuyamaca, SS Santiago, SS Peralta. They are part of the great, desperate supply chain stretching from North America to the bleeding fields of Europe. Their mission was singular and unglamorous: to carry bulk cargo. Grain from the American heartland to feed Allied armies and civilians. Coal from Welsh mines to fuel factories and warships. Manganese or timber phosphates, the mundane, essential grist of the industrial war machine. They were not warships. They carried no guns, though some were later fitted with defensive deck guns. Their armor was their anonymity and their strange construction. They were the workhorses, the shadows behind the battle lines. Sailing a concrete ship was a unique experience. Veterans of steel vessels reported the difference immediately. There was a profound sense of solidity. Waves didn't make the hull ring or flex visibly. They met a monolithic resistance. The ride was often described as steadier, less prone to sharp, shuddering rolls, but with a deeper, more ponderous motion in heavy seas. The ship felt like what it was, a moving piece of the earth. The interior acoustics were eerie. The dense concrete dampened sound. The clang of metal on metal, the constant metallic symphony of a steel ship, was absent. Voices sounded closer, yet more muted. The dominant sound was the engine and the sea, a more direct, almost primal connection to the vessel's function and environment. Crew quarters were sparse, often damp due to condensation against the cool concrete walls. The smell was not of rust and oil alone, but of damp cement and salt, a mineral, cavernous smell. But the most significant psychological effect was the knowledge of their hull. Every sailor on a steel ship in the U-boat-infested Atlantic lived with a subliminal fear: the tearing scream of a torpedo impact, the cold rush of the sea through a ruptured plate. On a concrete ship, that fear was tempered by a strange, perhaps irrational, hope. Would a torpedo designed to blast through steel plating simply explode against the thick, stone-like hull? Would it cause a localized crater rather than a fatal gash? Rumors and speculation circulated among the crews. They called their ships stone jugs and floating fortresses. This belief, whether technically sound or not, provided a sliver of mental armor. And the enemy took note. German naval intelligence was aware of the concrete ship program. To a U-boat commander peering through a periscope, a concrete ship would have presented a strange silhouette, blunter, heavier, with a peculiar waterline. While they were still valid targets, some anecdotal evidence suggests U-boats may have been initially wary, unsure of their defensive capabilities, or even mistaking them for novel types of warship or heavily armed decoys, Q-ships. This uncertainty, this slight element of mystery, became their first unplanned layer of defense. The concrete ship's war was not marked by famous battles, but by 1,000 small dramas of survival. Their greatest enemy was not always the torpedo, but the immense, indifferent power of the Atlantic itself. A steel hull has a degree of flexibility. It can work in heavy seas, groaning and bending to distribute stress. A concrete hull, while strong, is more rigid. Engineers had carefully designed them with reinforced flexibility in mind, but the fear of a catastrophic crack from a rogue wave or extreme torsion was a constant technical anxiety. Captains of these vessels likely sailed with a more cautious hand, avoiding the worst of storms when possible, knowing their ship would punish any hubris not with a leak, but with a structural failure that could be instantly fatal. Yet the records show they were surprisingly capable. They crossed the Atlantic. They delivered their cargoes. The SS Faith and her sisters proved that the concept was not just a floating dock, but a viable ocean-going vessel. They participated in the largest convoy operations, those sprawling, slow-moving cities of steel and steam that snaked across the ocean, each ship a precious life in a herd stalked by wolves. In a convoy, the concrete ships would have been the odd, slow-moving members at the rear, the stragglers that convoy commodores worried about. But they held their place. There are tantalizing, fragmented accounts of encounters. A U-boat surfacing to shell a merchant vessel with its deck gun, only to find its rounds sparking against and cratering the concrete hull of a ship like the Kayamaka, causing damage but not the catastrophic flooding it would on a steel ship. The submarine, low on ammunition and time, might break off the engagement, baffled by a target that refused to sink in the expected manner. While not invulnerable, a well-placed torpedo at the keel or a relentless artillery barrage would doom any ship. Their resilience was often greater than anticipated. They earned a reputation for being tough to kill. But the war ended. The armistice of November 11, 1918, silenced the guns. For the concrete fleet, the silence was existential. The frantic, purpose-driven life they were born into evaporated overnight. They were in the middle of the Atlantic or loaded in ports when the news came. The relief for their crews was profound. The uncertainty for the ships themselves was just beginning. They finished their final wartime voyages. They were decommissioned from emergency service. And almost immediately they faced a new challenge: irrelevance. The world rushed to demobilize and return to normalcy. The vast surplus of steel-hulled Liberty ships and standard freighters, built in even greater numbers, now flooded the market. These steel ships were faster, more economical to run, and easier to repair. The concrete ships, with their higher operating costs and niche construction, had no peacetime economic rationale. So began the long, slow process of retirement. Some were sold to private companies for niche uses, as floating warehouses in quiet ports, as stationary fuel storage hulks, even as crude oil carriers, where their inertness was an advantage. A few, like the SS Palo Alto, were turned into novelty attractions: a cement ship, amusement pier on the California coast. But for most, the fate was the backwater. They were towed to those remote, sheltered locations: Mallows Bay, the Thames Estuary, Puget Sound, and mothballed. The process was a kind of maritime mummification. Valuable machinery was removed. Hatches were sealed. They were anchored in rows, a silent, gray forest of masts and funnels against the sky. And there they were left. The crews disembarked for the last time, their footsteps echoing in the empty concrete caverns of the holds. The engines cooled, never to be fired again. The war machine's shadow had lengthened and then stilled. Now the Second War began, the war against time and the elements. But this was a war the concrete ships were uniquely equipped to fight. As we will see, their true metamorphosis was just beginning. From tools of global conflict, they were about to become something else entirely. Permanent sculptures in the gallery of the sea. The mothballed fleet presented a stark, silent spectacle. In places like Mallows Bay, dozens of these concrete hulks sat in rows, beached or half-submerged, their decks weathering, their paint peeling. They were not being reclaimed by the sea in the dramatic fashion of a shipwreck. Instead, they were undergoing a process of geological integration. While steel ships in similar graveyards would be red with rust, their plates buckling and collapsing within decades, the concrete hulls simply darkened and hardened. The carbonation process continued, deepening their gray to charcoal and black. Algae stained their waterlines. Barnacles and mussels claimed the submerged portions, creating a living crust. Birds nested on their decks. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the human artifact was being drafted into the ecosystem. This period of abandonment is where the ghost fleet truly earned its name. To a fisherman in a small boat at dusk, these looming dark shapes, often shrouded in river mist, looked like spectral vessels, the silent fleet of a forgotten navy. Local legends grew. Stories were told of strange lights seen on their decks, of echoes of machinery heard on foggy nights. They became landmarks of mystery, their very solidity making their desertion more poignant. A rotting wooden hulk disappears, a crumbling stone castle haunts. Yet, within this narrative of loss, science tells a story of quiet victory. The concrete ships were winning their war against entropy. The steel reinforcement inside, shielded from oxygen and salt water by the dense, alkaline concrete, corroded at a glacial pace compared to exposed steel. The hulls resisted the mechanical breakdown of waves and ice. They became, in effect, prefabricated reefs and breakwaters. Communities sometimes intentionally sank them to serve these very purposes, recognizing their strange durability. This unintended second life hints at the core irony of their existence. Conceived as a temporary, desperate measure for total war, they turned out to be some of the most permanent maritime structures ever built by humans for that era. Built to serve a conflict that lasted 4 years, they have endured for over a century. Their legacy is not one of martial glory, but of stubborn persistence. As we close this chapter on their active and immediate post-war lives, we are left with a transformed image. These are no longer just ships made of concrete. They are time capsules of 1918, preserving the dimensions, the design logic, and even the hopes of their creators in a material that seems to slow time itself. They are bridges between the frantic human world of war and the patient, chemical world of geology. They float in a liminal space between history and nature, between purpose and afterlife. Their story now pivots from the human drama of war and economics to the slower, grander dramas of chemistry, oceanography, and ecology. The shadow of the war machine has passed. What remains is the stone itself, waiting in the water, beginning its million-year conversation with the sea. We're moving on to the third part. We have left behind the thunder of war and the silence of abandonment. Now we descend to the molecular level, to the silent, relentless laboratory where the ocean transforms human artifice into geological artifact. This is the story of carbonation, mineralization, and the birth of the black patina, the process that turns a gray concrete hull into an obsidian monument. First, we must understand the starting material. The hull of a concrete ship is not a solid block. It is a complex, porous matrix. Imagine a labyrinth of microscopic tunnels and chambers within a stone. This is the capillary pore system of cured cement paste. When the ship was new, these pores were filled with air and water vapor. The surface was a rough, pale gray, the color of Portland cement and aggregate. When this matrix meets the sea, a slow-motion dialogue begins. Seawater is not just salty water. It is a rich, ionic soup containing dissolved carbon dioxide, CO2, chlorides, sulfates, magnesium, and calcium. The first and most profound agent of change is carbon dioxide. From the atmosphere and dissolved in the water, CO2 diffuses into the concrete's pores. Here it encounters calcium hydroxide, COH2, one of the main products of cement hydration. They react. This reaction, carbonation, is simple yet transformative. CaOH2 plus CO2 CaCO3 plus H2O. Calcium hydroxide plus carbon dioxide, calcium carbonate plus water. Calcium carbonate is limestone, the same material that forms seashells, chalk cliffs, and coral reefs. With this reaction, the ship begins to literally turn to stone. The calcium carbonate precipitates in the pores, gradually filling them. This makes the concrete denser, harder, and less permeable. It is a self-sealing, self-fossilizing process. But carbonation does something else. It lowers the pH. Fresh concrete is highly alkaline, pH 12-13. This alkalinity is what forms a protective, passive oxide layer on the embedded steel rebar, preventing corrosion. As carbonation advances, this protective shield is slowly neutralized. If the carbonation front reaches the rebar, corrosion can begin. Yet, in the dense, well-made concrete of these hulls, this front advances with glacial slowness, millimeters per decade. The steel within often remains protected, a slumbering skeleton in a stone tomb. Now add the other actors. Chloride ions from sea salt can penetrate deeper than carbonation, via capillary action. They can depassivate steel locally, causing pitting corrosion. Sulfate ions can react with other cement compounds to form expansive minerals like ytringite, which can cause internal cracking if the concrete is of poor quality. But in a massive, submerged structure, these processes are often slow, localized, and part of a complex, stable equilibrium. The most visible transformation, however, is the color change. The fresh gray turns to dark gray, then to charcoal, and in some cases to a deep, gleaming black. This is the black sails patina. It is caused by several factors. Manganese and iron oxides, trace elements in the original aggregate or cement, or dissolved in seawater, can oxidize and deposit as black mineral coatings. Biological activity. Biofilms of algae, bacteria, and fungi colonize the surface. Their metabolic processes and simple presence stain the concrete. As they die and decay, they leave behind organic films that darken with time. Accretion of soot and pollutants. For ships exposed to air, a century of atmospheric particulate settles into the rough surface. The limestone itself, dense, recrystallized calcium carbonate, can have a dark, lustrous quality. The result is a hull that no longer looks manufactured. It looks excavated. It has the color and texture of basalt, of weathered cliff face, of ancient megaliths. The sharp edges of hatches and railings soften, rounded by a century of microerosion. Aggregate stones within the mix become prominent, looking like inclusions in a natural conglomerate rock. The transformation is not uniform. It is a map of microenvironments, a testament to the ship's dialogue with the elements. We can read the life of the hull like a geologist reads a cliff face. The tidal zone is the most dynamic laboratory. Here, the hull is subjected to daily cycles of immersion and exposure, wetting and drying, heating and cooling. This area experiences the most aggressive carbonation from atmospheric CO2 during exposure, and the greatest salt crystallization stress. As seawater evaporates from the pores during low tide, salt crystals form, growing and exerting immense pressure that can slowly spall the surface, creating a rough, pitted texture. This zone often shows the darkest coloration, stained by concentrated oxides and robust microbial mats that can tolerate the harsh conditions. It is a band of intense, visible change. Below, the permanently submerged zone operates in a different regime. Here, change is slower, more constant. Carbonation proceeds with dissolved CO2. Biological fouling is rampant. Barnacles, mussels, oysters, and tube worms cement themselves to the hull, their calcareous shells adding a second, biological layer of limestone. Their roots and byssal threads penetrate microscopic pores, further anchoring the living crust to the stone. In this dark, cold environment, the concrete becomes part of the seabed's geology. Sediment drifts into open hatches, filling the holds. Anoxic, oxygen-free conditions can develop inside, preserving organic material and facilitating different, slower chemical processes, like sulfate reduction. The atmospheric zone, the decks and superstructures above the high tide line, faces sun, rain, and frost. Ultraviolet radiation breaks down surface binders. Acid rain, a more modern phenomenon, gently etches the surface. Freeze-thaw cycles in colder climates can cause scaling. Here, the black patina is often a thin veneer over a lighter, more eroded substrate. Rust streaks from any remaining ferrous metal bleed down the dark walls like tears of iron. This differential transformation sculpts the ship's final, ghostly aesthetic. At low tide, you see a banded monument, black, wet stone at the waterline, a drier, gray-black expanse of deck above, and the stark, skeletal remains of rusted infrastructure piercing the sky. The ship ceases to be a single object and becomes a topographical feature, its form revealing a century of interaction with wind, water, and light. Now consider the steel within. Its fate is the heart of the structural mystery. In a typical steel shipwreck, corrosion is unchecked. The metal oxidizes, loses strength, and the structure collapses. Inside the concrete hull, the steel rebar is in a state of suspended animation. The dense, carbonated concrete acts as a physical barrier, limiting oxygen and chloride supply. Electrochemical corrosion cells, if they start, have limited anodes and cathodes. Corrosion products like rust are less expansive because they are confined, and they can even act to seal the concrete-steel interface further. In essence, the concrete does not prevent corrosion indefinitely, it manages it. It turns a rapid, catastrophic process into a slow geological one. The steel may eventually succumb, but over centuries, not decades. By the time the rebar loses its strength, the concrete hull, now heavily mineralized and thickened by biological accretion, may have become a self-supporting stone shell, a true geotechnical structure, like a sea stack or a natural arch, that no longer requires its original skeleton. This is the ultimate irony and beauty. The concrete ships, designed as a cheap, temporary substitute for real steel ships, are evolving into something more permanent than steel could ever be. They are participating in the lithification process, the making of stone. They are becoming part of the sedimentary record. In this final contemplation of the ocean's embrace, we arrive at a profound philosophical pivot. The concrete ship is no longer undergoing decay, it is undergoing transfiguration. The language of loss, ruin, wreck, decay, fails to capture the process. This is not an ending, but a translation. The human artifact is being translated into the language of nature. Consider the concept of patina. On bronze, it is a valued green layer, verdigris, that signifies age and authenticity. On concrete, this black, stone-like patina is a signature of a completed dialogue between human intention and environmental reality. It is the hull's true finish, one that could only be applied by a century of sun, salt, and time. It is more authentic than the original gray paint, for it tells the truth of the object's life. This patina makes the ships timeless in a sensory way. They no longer look like they belong to 1918. They look primordial. They could be the ruins of a lost civilization, sea-worn megaliths from an age of giants. This visual timelessness short-circuits our historical sense and plugs us directly into a geological timescale. Standing before the SS Palo Alto on its California beach, you are not just looking at a World War I relic. You are looking at something that has the presence of a Druid stone or a basalt column. It evokes the same silent awe. This transformation also challenges our anthropocentric view of legacy. We build monuments hoping they will stand the test of time. The concrete ships achieve this, but not as we intended. Their legacy is not the preservation of their form as a ship, but the evolution of their form into a reef, an island, a habitat. Their legacy is ecological and geological. They will be remembered not by historians alone, but by oysters, fish, and marsh grasses. Their inscription is not on a plaque, but in the growth rings of barnacles and the strata of accumulated sediment within their holds. In this, they offer a humbling, beautiful lesson in post-human design. They were designed for a human purpose, wartime logistics, with human materials, ferrocement. But their most successful, enduring design feature turned out to be an unintended consequence: their ability to facilitate their own geological and ecological succession. The architect of their current magnificent form is not the engineer who drew the plans, but the ensemble cast of carbon dioxide, calcium ions, mollusk larvae, and tidal forces. As we prepare to move from the chemistry of transformation to the geography of the ghost fleet itself, we carry this new perspective. We will no longer be searching for shipwrecks. We will be visiting emerging karst formations, human-made fossil beds, and accidental wilderness sanctuaries. The black patina is our guide. It is the uniform of this new silent army of stone, a fleet that has finally dropped anchor in eternity. Now we move on to the fourth part. Having explored the birth, service, and molecular transformation of the concrete fleet, we now embark on a pilgrimage to their final resting places. We will visit the sunken congregations of these stone leviathans, where they now serve as the pillars and naves of submerged cathedrals. These are not grave sites but sanctums. Our first stop is the hallowed ground of Mallows Bay, on the Maryland shore of the Potomac River. This is the largest ship graveyard in the Western Hemisphere, and the concrete fleet forms its beating heart. From the air, it is a surreal landscape. The skeletal outlines of dozens of ships are visible just beneath the tea-colored water, arranged in rows and clusters as if in a naval parking lot frozen in time. At low tide, their blackened backs break the surface like the spines of sleeping dragons. Here you can wade among them. The water is shallow, warm. Your feet touch not sand, but the literal deck of a World War I cargo ship. The SS Athos, SS Kayamaka, SS Dora. Their names are gone, but their forms endure. The concrete is slick with algae, jet black where exposed, crumbling to reveal the rust-stained aggregate within, like black granite shot through with veins of iron. Fish dart through gaping hatches. Oysters cluster in dense, sharp colonies on the vertical walls. Great blue herons stand statuesque on the highest points, using these human-made islands as hunting perches. Mallows Bay is not a cemetery. It is a watery national park, a monument to both human folly and nature's breathtaking resilience. It is a place where history has literally become habitat. Now journey west to the dramatic Pacific coast of Aptos, California. Here the SS Palo Alto, the cement ship, lies beached at the end of a long pier. Unlike the submerged hulks of Mallows Bay, The Palo Alto is fully exposed to the sky, a behemoth stranded on the sand. Its story is different. After brief service, it was turned into a glittering amusement pier in the 1920s, complete with a dance floor, swimming pool, and casino. That chapter is long gone. Now it is a colossal broken sculpture. Its hull is a masterpiece of the black patina. A century of Pacific storms has sculpted it. The concrete has spalled in great sheets, revealing the intricate lattice of rust-colored rebar within, which itself has corroded into delicate, lace-like patterns. The stern is collapsed, a jumble of monolithic concrete blocks. On a foggy morning, with waves crashing through its ruptured sides, it looks like the carcass of a mythical beast. It is a stark, melancholy, and powerfully beautiful sight, a testament to the dual forces of human entertainment and natural entropy. We voyage north to the cold, deep waters of Puget Sound, Washington. Here, in the shadow of evergreens and snow-capped mountains, lie the remains of the USS Bethel and other concrete vessels. Sunk intentionally as breakwaters, they now form the backbone of private docks and marinas. Their fate is more integrated, less dramatic, but no less fascinating. Submerged in the cold, nutrient-rich water of the Sound, they are shrouded in a dense, fuzzy coat of marine growth, giant plumose anemones, sea stars, and kelp. Divers visiting these sites describe swimming over structures that look less like ships and more like rolling hills of life, a soft, pulsing landscape where the original form is barely discernible beneath a half-meter of filter feeders. The concrete here is not black, but a mottled palette of orange, white, and purple, the colors of the biological kingdom that has claimed it. It is a gentler, more lush reclamation. Crossing the Atlantic, we find the Crete fleet in Chersonesos, Greece. A group of concrete ships, mostly barges, beached and abandoned after World War II. On the rocky Mediterranean shore, under a blazing sun, their transformation is stark and artistic. The concrete has bleached to a pale, bone-like gray, cracked and fissured by heat and salt. The black patina here is minimal, replaced by brilliant white salt efflorescence and rust streaks that look like abstract paintings. Against the deep blue of the sea, they are surreal, geometric sculptures. Monuments to a forgotten logistical effort in a landscape saturated with ancient history. They look like modern art installations questioning industry and decay. But perhaps the most hauntingly beautiful of all is the SS Captain, lost in the clear, shallow waters of the British Virgin Islands. This is a ship that didn't just sink, it was posed. Lying perfectly upright on a white sand bottom in maybe 30 feet of water, it is a snorkeler's dream. Sunlight filters down through the crystalline water, illuminating its decks. The black hull is a canvas for kaleidoscopic coral growth. Elkhorn, staghorn, and brain corals have taken root, turning the structure into a vertical reef. Tropical fish swarm its corridors. The ship's holds are open to the sky, filled with shifting rays of light and sand. It is a masterpiece of accidental art, a fusion of industrial design and tropical paradise that feels both eerie and serene. It is not a wreck, it is an aquatic architecture, a palace for fish. Each site tells a different story of interaction. In the cold north, life blankets the form. In the arid Mediterranean, the elements bleach and crack it. In the tropics, life transforms it into a jeweled structure. Yet, at all sites, the concrete's endurance is the constant. It provides the eternal stage upon which these local dramas of ecology and erosion play out. Standing before these sites, whether in person, in a photograph, or in the mind's eye, one experiences a unique form of awe. It is not the awe of pristine nature, nor the awe of a perfectly preserved monument. It is the awe of the hybrid sublime. These are places where human history and natural process have become so entangled that they are now a single, inseparable phenomenon. The ship is the reef. The hull is the cliff face. The cargo hold is the forest floor. This hybridity challenges our categories. Are we looking at archaeology or ecology? A ruin or a habitat? The answer is both. They are ecofacts, objects of human manufacture that have been fully adopted into an ecological system. To study them requires a multidisciplinary mind, the historian's eye for dates and blueprints, the ecologist's eye for succession and niches, the chemist's eye for carbonation, and the poet's eye for metaphor. This makes them profoundly democratic monuments. They do not glorify kings or commemorate battles in the traditional sense. They commemorate materiality and adaptation. They tell the story of a substance, ferro-cement, and its unexpected dialogue with the planet. They are monuments to the ingenuity of crisis. Yes, but more so, they are monuments to time's patient artistry. For the visitor, they offer a rare gift, palpable deep time. We can touch a century. We can run a hand over the cold, black, oyster-crusted flank of the SS Kayamaka and feel the simultaneous presence of 1918 and today. We can see the future in the sediment filling its hold, in the sapling growing from its deck. These ships are clocks with multiple hands showing human time, geological time, and ecological time all at once. They collapse chronology, offering a direct sensory connection to the continuum. As we prepare for our final reflective chapter, we carry with us the images of these cathedrals. The serene rose of Mallows Bay, the tragic grandeur of the Palo Alto, the lush hills of Puget Sound, the sun-bleached skeletons of Crete, the coral-crowned palace of the Caribbean. They are not endpoints of a story, but waypoints in an ongoing transformation. They have revealed themselves not as dead things, but as things more alive than ever, pulsing with ecosystems, breathing with the tides, slowly chanting their stone hymn to the sun and moon. Their revelation is an invitation to see the world not as a division between the human and the natural, but as a continuum of process and form. To see that what we build, no matter its purpose, eventually joins the conversation of wind, water, and life. And that in that joining, there can be a beauty far stranger and more durable than anything we initially intended. In the realm of material science, the Ghost Fleet is a century-long open-air laboratory. It provides real-world, long-term data on the performance of ferrocement in a marine environment that no accelerated lab test could ever match. Scientists studying corrosion, concrete carbonation, and biodeterioration can analyze these hulls as naturally aged specimens. Their endurance validates the principle of using concrete for massive, permanent marine structures where weight is less of an issue. Think of breakwaters, seawalls, offshore platforms, and even future floating cities. The black patina itself is a subject of study. It is a record of environmental chemistry, a slow-formed protective coating. Could we engineer concrete from the outset to develop such a patina more quickly, enhancing its durability and ecological integration? The fleet suggests we look to materials that don't fight the environment, but evolve with it. This points toward biomimetic materials and self-healing concretes infused with bacteria that precipitate calcite, a process the ships are undergoing naturally, just very slowly. The Titans point the way to a future where our structures are not static, but adaptive and resilient in dialogue with their surroundings. But it is in the domain of human philosophy that their echo is deepest. They are a powerful metaphor for post-traumatic growth on a collective scale. Born from the trauma of a world war, objects of panic and necessity, they have transcended their origins. They have not just survived, they have found a new, peaceful, generative purpose. They teach us that the scars of history, if made of the right stuff, can become the foundations for new life. They are monuments not to war, but to what can grow in war's long shadow. They also challenge our perception of time and legacy. We typically think of legacy as the preservation of an original state, a museum piece, a frozen moment. The Ghost Fleet proposes a different model, legacy as continuity of influence. Their influence didn't stop when they stopped carrying coal. It changed form. They began to influence ecosystems, coastlines, scientific thought, and human imagination. Their legacy is not a snapshot, but a river, changing, branching, but always flowing from their source. They are memento mori and memento vitae simultaneously. They remind us of impermanence, the lost war, the abandoned purpose, and of incredible permanence, the enduring stone. They show that decay is not opposite to life, it is its partner. The decaying ship is the living reef. This dissolves a dualistic anxiety and replaces it with a cyclical, comforting understanding. For us, the listeners resting in the dark, they offer a final, gentle lesson in letting go. We spend our lives building careers, relationships, identities, and often fear their erosion, their change, their end. The black sails of the Ghost Fleet tell us that what we build, if built with integrity, with good ferro cement, will not simply vanish, it will transform. Its essential strength will persist, even as its form and function evolve in ways we cannot predict. Our endings are not deletions. They are the start of a long, slow, beautiful chemical and ecological sentence we will not live to read, but can trust is being written. We have followed the echo to its source, not in a shipyard, but in the human capacity to find meaning. The concrete fleet, these black sails, are now more than ships. They are ideograms etched upon the water and land. Ideograms of resilience, of unintended consequence, of time's patient alchemy. As this series concludes, we don't arrive at a simple conclusion. We arrive at a state of understanding. A quiet acceptance that some stories don't end, they deepen. The ghost fleet is not a problem solved, but a mystery embraced. Its meaning will continue to evolve as it sinks another inch into the sediment, as a new species colonizes its hull, as a future generation sees it with new eyes. Their ultimate lesson may be one of humility and hope. Humility because they show that our most urgent creations are quickly surpassed and abandoned, becoming pawns of vaster, slower forces. Hope because they show that those same creations, if built with a fundamental honesty of material, can go on to serve the world in ways we never dreamed, becoming gifts to the future we never intended to give. So, let us say goodnight not to the ships, but to our own need for a neat ending. Let us leave them as we found them, silent, black, and busy with the world's work. They are out there right now. In Mallows Bay, a heron folds one leg and settles on the deck of the Cuyamaca for the night. On the California coast, a wave crashes through the heart of the Palo Alto, and the sound is swallowed by the fog. In the Caribbean, a parrotfish sleeps in a cloud of its own mucus, nestled in a coral branch that grows from a gunnel. They are at peace. They have completed their human journey and are now on their geological one. They are home, and so are we. For in contemplating these stone voyagers, we have touched the deep time that cradles our own brief moment. We are made of the same stardust, subject to the same forces of transformation. Our lives, too, are a kind of ferro-cement, a composite of experience and spirit, designed for a purpose, yet capable of a beautiful, unexpected afterlife in the memories and influences we leave behind. We can rest as solidly as they do in that truth. As we conclude our story here, I am very grateful for your listening and support up to this point. I would appreciate it if you would subscribe and give me a small like. See you in my next interesting and educational videos. Stay with science. Good night.